Have you or any of your loved ones ever been victim to medical malpractice? Because I'm pretty sure that's what happened to me in the last few days. You see, I had a relatively standard case of tonsillitis, and I asked for antibiotics from CityMD for several times in a row, and they refused to give it to me for various reasons. And because of that, today I had to go to the ER because this tonsillitis turned into a massive pus-filled abscess that prevented me from breathing and thinking clearly, which are really important when you are doing YouTube. Luckily, they filled me up with some steroids, which I'm pretty sure it's the same kind of steroids they give to like Tom Brady if he has strep throat right before the Super Bowl. This stuff really works well, and I'm kind of afraid what happens when it runs out. So let's take advantage of these drugs right now and get a video out. I want to talk about the Darksaber. I always thought it looked a little better in red because there's some really darker Sith-like tendencies to this weapon, if the name itself wasn't obvious enough. Wielders of the Darksaber are rarely as elegant and refined as wielders of more traditional lightsabers, and that is mainly because without force sensitivity, it's hard for a wielder of a lightsaber to have true connection to a blade and the kyber crystals within. Remember, a lightsaber's blade should more or less be weightless, and so it's really confusing for a non-force sensitive to actually find true balance when they're using this weapon. And so whether it's Moff Gideon or Din Djarin, Bo-katan or Pre-vizsla, they all seem to struggle with the Darksaber. That's just one of the more visible signs why the Darksaber was never really meant to be wielded by a Mandalorian. I mean, yes, Pre-vizsla, the Jedi who created the Darksaber, was in fact a Mandalorian first. But he had all of the proper training on not only how to use the blade, but also how to control one's emotions so that they don't improperly use it on the wrong people. Pre-vizsla would lead the Jedi Order eventually and go on to become the Mandalore, or leader of his people. The funny thing is, unlike other famous Mandalorian leaders, he wasn't a conqueror or an imperialist. Instead, he was a unifier. He brought together many different factions of Mandalorians and placed them all beneath one giant roof. Sort of like
Bo-katan walks both worlds. And she can bring all tribes together. It is time to retake Mandalore.
Yeah, if you take a look at it, Bo-katan, she's really not a traditional Mandalorian leader, which means she's not really fit for the Darksaber, which is actually, I think, a good thing. Pre-vizsla was also not a very traditional type of Mandalorian leader. If anything, he was a Jedi-Lorian, a combination of two cultures that are extremely different in what they believe in. Mandalorians take pride in their warrior culture. They strive for excellence and glory on the battlefield. To cease fighting is to cease living as a Mandalorian. The Jedi, on the other hand, are preservers of peace. They use their magical abilities and diplomatic training to prevent conflict as much as possible. The thing that the Jedi fear the most is to lose oneself to the negative emotions generated by conflict and fighting. Ironically, the Mandalorians who love battle so much focus most of their attention on defensive equipment, aka their indestructible Beskar armor. And the Jedi who hate battle focus most of their attention on offensive weapons, like the elegant but deadly lightsaber. I mean, there are beliefs and traditions you make up on the spot, and then there are beliefs and traditions that are created from years and years of experience. And I think the Mandalorians' focus on defense and the Jedi's focus on offense actually makes a lot of sense and tells a lot about how these factions really should be truly run. And I think Pre-vizsla was unique because he was able to kind of take the best from the Jedi and also take the best from the Mandalorians and kind of combine them into one larger ideology and ruling style. Bo-katan has also walked both worlds. She was a part of a rogue terrorist organization, and then she became a part of an insurgency until she became the ruler of Mandalore herself. Bo-katan's greatest strength is failing gracefully and learning from all of her past mistakes. I mean, she fails a lot. She failed all throughout the Clone Wars. She failed all throughout the Rebel series. She failed up until the very last episode where she led her troops into a massive ambush by Moff Gideon. But Bo-katan always learns from her failures. That's what's important. And one of the biggest obstacles she's had to confront was this tradition of the Darksaber, an object she never really rightfully won. Even the whole exchange of the blade from Din Djarin via the crab monster seemed a bit sketchy. But here's the thing, Pre-vizsla never meant the Darksaber to become a symbol of leadership for the Mandalorians. When he died, his lightsaber was returned to the Jedi Temple. Perhaps this was a message to the Jedi and the Mandalorians that these two organizations didn't need to always be opposed to one another, that they could actually, set apart their differences and work together and create more peace and stability for the galaxy together. I mean, in Legends, these two groups have an extremely unfriendly relationship. Most of the weapons that we see on your average Mandalorian warrior, from the explosive rockets to the flamethrowers, are designed to kill the Jedi and get around their lightsaber. Even the Mandalorian jetpacks are theorized to be a way to increase the mobility of a Mandalorian so that they can keep a Jedi from getting close enough to use their blade. The Darksaber only became a sign for Mandalorian leadership when members of House Vizsla looted the Jedi Temple and used it as a symbol of leadership. And while Pre-vizsla seemed like this great and amazing person, his offspring, well, they were definitely not that great. And they all seemed to suffer the same problems: unchecked and overinflated egos, preference to use violence over diplomacy, and many other traits that are not ideal for a leader to have. I mean, how could Pre-vizsla's descendants have fallen so far? Well, it's actually like a rite of passage for great people to have disappointing offspring. And that's because greatness, well, it's not free, and it's actually not that great to be the greatest of the greatest, because you're talking about endless amounts of unbillable hours, which usually means sacrificing quality time with your kids. Now, we have to remember that Pre-vizsla was a Jedi, at least for half of his life. That means completely ignoring his family and just pretending like they don't exist. That doesn't create good offspring. And so these Vizslas, the ones who created this tradition of the Darksabers, they believe only through strength and pure bloodlines can Mandalore achieve greatness. And I think you come to such beliefs when you don't have good parenting. I mean, this just makes zero sense. I mean, this is your typical strongman nonsense. It's just not rational. I mean, the second humanity evolved from small tribal circles, we stopped choosing our leaders based on how strong they were and how good they were at fighting. It never mattered how strong the Mandalorians were. They were always the best fighters individually. And that matters very little at the galactic scale. Diplomatic and economic power are equally, if not more important than military prowess. True strength comes from intelligence and also courage. It doesn't come from a dick measuring contest or superstitions. You see, there are two places in our society where superstitions, dumb beliefs, and prejudice die first. And it's the place where human quality matters the most: in sports and in the military. Some of the finest American military units we've ever had were mostly black units, like the Harlem Hellfighters, Tuskegee Airmen. God knows why they would ever fight to defend a country who had no appreciation for them at the time. I mean, I have the utmost respect for all World War II veterans, but these guys especially, I mean, we really didn't deserve them. But at least the people in the military understood in life or death situations, you just can't afford to be prejudiced and stupid. Here's one of my favorite quotes from George Patton. It's a part of a speech he gave to the 761st Tank Battalion. This was a mostly African-American unit that relieved the 101st at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. This was a very decisive battle, one of the last counteroffensives that Germany was able to carry out during World War II. He said the following:
Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you.
Now, if any of you know anything about Patton, he was not a perfect man. I mean, he was kind of a prima donna, and he had a lot of Vizsla-like character traits, and probably by today's standards, held some very racist views. Patton could have been a complete monster, but instead he was actually a very useful and important figure in the US military during World War II. And that has a lot to do with the system that American has set up at the time, which was just beginning to realize that fighting for equality was important, because you had Nazis over there killing all sorts of people for no fucking reason. Patton was steered towards being more pragmatic rather than prejudiced because the American system was focused on this. I mean, sometimes when you have people like this, like Pre-vizsla as well, you just need some type of structure, like the Children of the Watch, to push them in the right direction so that they can do more good than damage with their character traits. I mean, the truth is the Vizslas weren't, inherently evil. They were just all kind of stupid. Pre-vizsla teaming up with Maul and a bunch of criminals to retake Mandalore, that was like one of the dumbest things you could actually do. And this idea of choosing your leader by deciding who can win the Darksaber in combat is also really dumb. It kind of just seems like the Vizslas were too lazy to truly understand what it takes to be a leader, and so they're like, oh, let's just make it into a dick measuring contest. You know, leaders need to be problem solvers. They need to be patient. They need to investigate the root of an issue and craft the proper solutions. Leaders have to be good at choosing the right people to delegate their responsibilities to. Leaders need to be super disciplined and intimately understand who they are as people so they can keep their own worst tendencies in check. Defeating someone in lightsaber combat has nothing to do with leadership. Sometimes it doesn't even have anything to do with skill. I mean, sometimes it's just luck that allows you to win. But again, it does boil down what is a very complex process into something easier to understand for a simple-minded Vizsla. Individuals like Paz do much better when they're being guided by well-intentioned people that are smarter than him. This is why Paz Vizsla, when constrained within the confines of the Children of the Watch's extreme ideology, is a much more positive figure, even though his sacrifice and ultimate death, while heroic, was probably unnecessary. One, because Bo-katan really did make that hole way too small, but also because Paz could have just flown away when he defeated all the Imperial Super Commandos and was confronted with the Praetorian Guards. Again, Paz Vizsla is a great guy to have by your side. I would love to fight in a battle with him, but I definitely wouldn't want to follow him into battle because I don't want to die. I mean, the same thing could be said for Axe Wolves, another individual who took on the challenge of the Darksaber. This guy is clearly a badass. I mean, he flew into the upper atmosphere with a jetpack, commandeers an Imperial light cruiser, and rams it into Moff Gideon's base. And he doesn't get himself killed in the process. He's actually an excellent leader at the tactical level. But when we see him insult Din Djarin for not having pure Mandalorian blood, or in this scene where Paz and Axe have a knife fight over some chess, proves to us that he's not in control of his emotions, and he has some pretty backwards views as well. I mean, he's really not fit for rule because of these two traits, because, you know, leadership 90% of the time is not dealing with military engagements. You have to deal with more normal things like how you can serve the people, create policy for growth, you know, that kind of stuff, boring stuff. I mean, basically every person who has seriously tried to rule Mandalore by killing the person who had the blade before them were not really right for leadership, whether it's Axe or Paz or Maul. I mean, Bo-katan, despite all of her past mistakes and flaws, well, she never challenged Sabine Wren for the blade. She never challenged Din Djarin for it either. She refused to spill the blood of innocent people, especially people who she considered friends, for an abstract symbol of leadership. That's not how she wanted to rule, and I respect her a lot for this. I mean, when Moff Gideon tried to goad her into challenging Din Djarin, she doesn't let the ISB officer get into her head, which I think shows a great deal of maturity and control over one's emotions. Din Djarin also never sought the blade for himself either. He just wanted to protect it against guys like Paz, who I'm sure he liked, but he probably thought was too toxic to be a good leader. Because trial by combat for a leadership position is extremely toxic. Whether it's Mandalorians and the Darksaber, or the Wakandans and their own crazy version of it. You know, having someone like Maul, or better yet, Moff Gideon win the Darksaber is living proof that this entire concept is deeply flawed. You know, ironically, Moff Gideon, despite how intelligent he is actually providing a great service to the Mandalorians by destroying this weapon. The Darksaber will no longer be a symbol for leadership. It will now be in a museum, broken into pieces, as a cautionary tale on what happens when your society worships death and destruction over, I don't know, compassion and logic. The true symbol of the Mandalorians is their armor, which they use to protect each other. I mean, look at this last fight where Bo and Din Grogu, finally a proper name for the little guy. This fight is all about the love they have for one another. And they win together because fighting for love is such a better cause than fighting for personal gain or power or to destroy someone. I mean, the tactics and strategy in this last battle might have been more silly Star Wars nonsense, but the meaning behind how these combatants fought, that's what made it a truly beautiful moment. And so I, for one, am really glad that this Darksaber will now just be a part of Mandalorian history and will no longer play a role in Mandalorian politics. Although, you know, if the Mandalorians ever want to get toxic again, I guess they could just climb into that pool and wake up that mythosaur that's clearly trying to sleep and try to ride it. The Mandalorians never disappoint.